You cannot submit a request without that. And the character limitation is also something that we really need to have. Otherwise, it's a lot of back and forth.
Hello and welcome to the Multilingual Content Podcast, where experts discuss international content management, translation, and global communication. I'm Caterina from Undertow, and today we bring you the second installment of the chat of our founder Nicola Calabrese with Stefania Russo, Head of UX Content at Glovo. As the previous episode, this is full of tips and tricks of UX localization, and I highly recommend you to listen to the previous segment if you haven't already. And without further ado, let's dive in.
Regarding in general UX localization, how do you think it influences critical metrics such as user engagement, conversion rates, and customer satisfaction in different markets?
Yes, this is also a hot topic in the industry. So I think that localization should be considered and is considered in many cases a growth lever that allows a company product to expand to other markets. Now it's when you're tracking conversion, user engagement, the traffic of the website, it's very difficult to isolate the impact of how localization contributed to that. But at the same time, it's also difficult to say that which percentage of impact in this metric had the tech team because they solved a bug, or a SEO team, or the product team. So isolating it's pretty difficult or almost impossible. I think it's valuable for us because we always need to demonstrate the impact of localization is aligning with the stakeholders' main metric. Maybe you're working with a 2 or 20 product team and they are tracking, for instance, conversion, more general one. Here, an interesting exercise that I did is tracking the same metric of your main stakeholder, but visualizing them from your perspective, like conversion. I want to see the conversion from the language and country perspective for a specific application. Maybe for my metric, I don't need to see the conversion of a specific touch point in the customer journey because for me, it's not that relevant for me. Checking that metric, but from the country and language perspective, gives me way more information than seeing how the users behave in that particular moment. And this is actually gives you the data that you need to take some other decisions. For instance, when people having a good understanding of the user base, how they actually interact and how the conversion is or the traffic is in specific countries and languages if needed, it actually helps you to take decision like, hey, we want to add a new language. And you say, okay, let's check, because maybe the people wants you to add another language, but there are literally 0 or 1 user with the device language in that set to that specific language. And you see, yes, but for 0.00, we don't really need that effort. Or you are asked to remove because we think that we don't need this language. We are just spending money. But then you go there and check, hey, but the device language for this country is super high. Actually, they're using the application more in this language than the other. This is super important data that you need to have. Of course, then also important to align with the marketing team. What are our customer satisfaction team to understand what's the percent of customer satisfaction per country, the revenue, aligning with the local teams. And because they also have data, they also use different data, different metrics compared to the product one. So having an overview of how everything is moving across the languages, you cannot deep dive into all of them, but at least having an overview per country of how everything is going will help you also identify there is a peak or a down moment in conversion in that specific country. Then you can start investigating. Maybe the app was down in a language, or there was a huge bug relation language, and users change the language to English to understand. That data helps you to identify all of these situations.
And in cases, for example, when you notice a drop and you want to investigate, how would you usually go about it?
Well, you you also get creative. You discuss with maybe a product manager and try to get more data analyst. Depends on the situation. And try, hey, can you help me going a bit deeper on this data? And then basically depends on the results. You can see if there was a specific moment where the user changed the drop, and then you can check if there was an issue. And from the linguistic side. So this is like trying to understand and go deep on the data with all the possible stakeholders and asking favors. Can you please help me?
Yeah, as I said, it might not be linguistic issue, it might be something else.
Exactly. Yeah, most of the cases I have to say that it's a very low case. It's a linguistic problem that causes that. But sometimes it's also the easy, no, maybe it's the translation is wrong. Like, okay, let's check it. But then or maybe it's a technical issue because there is like a truncation and the user cannot really see that. It's linguistic, but it's actually from the technical perspective.
Yeah, maybe it's some feature that broke in localization.
Yeah. Or maybe some plurals that they broke the the tech part and yes.
Yeah.
It's common.
And actually, before you mentioned some tools, especially to manage the keys, the strings at scale, as we said, not Excel, but a TMS or a specific software. Is there any other tool that you will recommend for UX localization in general? So I would say encompassing from user research to testing.
Yeah. Yes, lately a lot of transition management systems have plugins, connectors with the design tools like Figma or Sketch. So these are actually super interesting, and they're also they have plugins for pseudo localization. For instance, Figma plugins or any other design plugins depends on. It's not easy for UI localization, there are different considerations. Sometimes these plugins can work with only for specific parts of the types of products, smaller ones. When you have a lot of product with a huge amount of string to be managed, probably the connection with the development tools is easier, but it really depends on the setup of the tech part. They are useful, the design plugins, because they put the localization a bit earlier in the process, not after development, but after design and before development. They are useful because they allow designers to think more about localization, that their design will actually be seen by just this little bit of users in English, but most of them will see it with different typographies, with different alphabets, with different length, and it actually is different. Something useful that we find useful is using the pseudo-localization plugins that the designer can. We have installed it, and then directly in Figma, designer can check how the design looks like with longer text. And if they didn't implement the auto layout, then it's clearly visible that the text goes straight on one single line and goes beyond any box.
If you can clarify a bit what you mean by pseudo-localization.
Pseudo-localization means that you connect the design tool with a translation management system. Basically, when you hit that pseudo-translation in the design, you don't have English, but you have a mix of special characters, which it's also important to be tested, and with longer text. So, I don't know, like open here can be replaced by double the length of character mix they don't make any sense, but at least you have special character and longer text, and you get that visual support that this design looks weird with a longer text, or we need to make some changes.
You can fonts as well.
The font is different. It actually helps you in your awareness, raising awareness battle, and it's super, super useful. And one thing here that I would like to add is usually tools. Everyone thinks I will implement that tool and the problem is solved. Tool will definitely help, but before you definitely need to create a process that is scalable and that works for all the parties, and implementing that some sort of collaboration, roles and responsibilities, or collaboration between all the parties. Designer, developers, localization specialists, product managers. So that collaboration, that process needs to work. Otherwise, you can have all the plugins you want, but no one will use them, basically. Or you will always have to constantly remember, hey, did you check this? But if you make your priority always working on the collaboration with the colleagues and stakeholders you work with, then it pays off on the long term, because then localization will start, to be involved in meetings. Okay, we are thinking to create in this feature. What do you think from the localization perspective? Or they are tackling a design topic and they involve someone from the localization teams. This is super important. Tools will help, but the process and collaboration between the teams is like number one priority.
I really like that you mentioned that. Yeah, you stressed that. And the roles and responsibilities as well. It's quite important, because otherwise nobody knows who is supposed to do what, who's responsible for what. So it's a big...
Yeah, and usually with content and words, everyone speak another language and everyone is able to write. So it's the expertise, sometimes it's hidden, and with all of these practices and processes, you need to constantly demonstrate. This is something that happens to everyone, and in the content world, not only localization, but also UX writing is the same. So everyone is able to read and write, so everyone will have something to say. But if you always try to explain and raise the awareness about why you are actually worrying about two words that no one thinks about, and you think about how the users actually interacts with them, then things start changing.
And in regards to the always around tools, like during the user research phase, is there anything specific that you think will be useful that you would recommend? You don't need to say specific tools, but like the kind of tool that might be useful for...
user research, they use different tools that are out there to run interviews. I didn't use them myself, but I always use them with the research experts. Yeah, I think that there are different like tests in the format of surveys, user interviews. There are specific scripts that have to be followed. There are different methodologies depending on what actually you need to assess. But on that, I would always rely, if you have research colleagues, always rely on their expertise. And they usually, what happens is that I go to research, people say, okay, I would like to do this. What would you recommend? And we create the plan, the research plan together.
And are you do you have let's say linguists involved in sometimes in the user research, or is specifically just the user research team that is separate?
Yeah, we usually, we have been doing it with the real users. The idea is to run tests with users, because with linguists, then of course you work with your linguists, and you can have testers or reviewers, and you have access to.
Did you have linguists joining the session or having a look at how they work?
So far, no, but we have plans to do more and more about that.
Okay. And on the testing side of things, so let's say after you've localized the product, any specific tool that you would recommend, like you mentioned before, to be able to track bugs and flag them promptly?
On our side, we use a tracking system where we are able to clarify, okay, what kind of issue is this? We have a backlog. So the linguistic issues can be fixed straight away, but on the other more tech or design issues that we have a backlog, then depending on the team that is in charge of that specific part of the product, you flag it and it's put in their own backlog, and when you're it's picked up. So yeah, this is in terms what I was mentioning before about system is when you do usually testing, that you have a tester that goes through an application and they need to find a way to flag the issues and be able to inform the stakeholder, in this case, localization team, about that. So on a general level, let's avoid the email continuous messages, but it's better if you have a clear, even if an Excel or a spreadsheet does the job if it's prepared correctly.
For this, for this part.
Yeah, for this part, or a Jira system, or a Trello board, or a Notion board, anything. As long as it's well prepared to serve its scope, it works.
And do you think there's anything we didn't talk about that you think it would be really important to?
It's an important topic here that probably we didn't touch, is the collaboration that you can have with the UX writers or content designers, which also, they are also part of the user experience teams. If you are lucky that you are in the same team, then it's really nice to go from the collaboration. Hey, we received queries from translators that we don't understand the source. What does it mean? No, but usually the collaboration is great when there are bigger initiatives that are led by some content designers, that they have been expert on content, both the localization and the content design part, they are the ones that are able to address also within product or design meetings when the localization is not there. They are able to flag, hey, this probably is not is something we should take into account. We should involve localizations. It's nice to strengthen that collaboration because then we can help each other. On the localization side, you have translators are usually the ones really identifying issues something that cannot really be transferred in another language, and they are able to pass this feedback on the writers. And the other way around, the writers, since they are involved in the very beginning of the process, right ideation phase, they with the designer, with just the problem, we need to solve this user problem. There from the ideation, localization is not in this session because humanly, we can't be in all product meetings of the world. They are from the very beginning of the process, and they are able to flag well in advance, hey, but this idea that you have won't work for all the markets. And then is when they actually pull you in. This is a really, really nice collaboration because you actually help each other and put a lot of importance on the content that usually is always left at the end. But something that I usually say is like, imagine a product with a lot of nice images, but without words. I don't think it's gonna work in any market. So yes, so that part is from in the UX world, the collaboration between a content designer, UX writer, and localization specialist is super important. And the fact that just to conclude, the continuous raise of awareness about international users, the fact that English users is just a minority and that users want to always read content in their own language. There is a very famous DFA research stats over there about the internet usage. So this is something that will never end.
And actually, you mentioned that, like, regarding the collaboration with external partners, especially, but in general, the people working on the translation. What you mentioned, like screenshots, absolutely, or at least visual aid to have an idea where the strings are going to be placed. Is there anything else like that you think would be really important and maybe sometimes is undervalued or maybe not considered that important? It actually help quite a lot in that phase to get a.
You mean in the localization process?
Yeah.
Okay. Ideally, of course, the visual help, it's like a mandatory. I don't think we should actually allow any localization with a translator not having any inputs about anything, because then it's a problem and then it's an issue from the localization. Yes, but we basically blindly translating because you couldn't spend some time to give me a screenshot. On our side, for instance, the PR process, we put the screenshot mandatory. You cannot submit a request without that. And the character limitation is also something that we really need to have. Otherwise, it's a lot of back and forth. Ideally, you should have also some sort of note field information where the translator is also aware of what the objective of that specific feature, like what you are trying to achieve with that. And this is like something that should be there. Ideally, in an ideal world, you can also have, for your most important top-tier languages, you have in-house UX writer in the target language or in-house translator for us, from the most important part, where they can actually really be expert of that part of the product. So I would say that from the product perspective, in-house translators for depend on, of course, on the capabilities of the company, blah, blah. It's really something that adds a lot of value.
Yeah, I was asking that because I know, like, in an ideal world, all the translators will be in-house, but it's not always feasible.
No, it's not scalable, just like that. So it's a screenshots field and information, at least even if it's not really needed or for every single screen, but when there is an important launch or important project, at least I think that from the in-house localization team, we need to make an effort to provide as much information as possible to allow them to do a good job. Otherwise, you are translators, unfortunately, many times I've requested to do a perfect job with no time and with basically no information. And this is not fair.
I'm really happy you mentioned also the character limitation, which is really painful to get it afterwards.
It's so painful, yes.
And
yeah. So that's why we also implemented that you cannot submit a pull request without that. And it's a red flag.
There's another thing that we didn't talk about, but I think because we gave it for granted, like machine translation in product, like UX localization. What's your experience on this?
Depends. as everything. So for the user interface, I wouldn't recommend machine translation for user interface. There are so many items, what we actually mentioned. I wouldn't have machine translation for the UI. If there are parts of the product that even if in between the product that can be machine translated, then of course, it's really, you need to understand like what's the type of content that you have and the user, what you want that user to do. But for UI itself, I wouldn't recommend. But of course, machine translation in application nowadays is used to machine translate user reviews, to translate information about rooms, hotels, descriptions, food as well. So in that cases, it's like a support that you give to the user because they are maybe in another location and they cannot read, or there are user reviews that are in another language. Then there are a lot of features in well-known application that you can click a translate button and you get the content in your own language. I'm totally up for that. On the internal, more localization side, I wouldn't translate UI with machine translation.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. It's just, I thought we should mention this just in case. Because I do understand, like with reviews, you have so much content and it would be literally impossible to translate that at the scale, at the speed that you get reviews.
Like in the real time, right? And so
So it makes sense. But yeah, just wanted to double check, because especially now with all this AI hype, you still have people, we can do it with AI. And yes and no.
I mean, AI is definitely, it's here and we use it. We need to implement it and use it because it's the real world we are in. So I'm not scared that we will be on home and with no job, because I think the human support is needed in a different way, but it's needed.
I think it's a tool. I don't know if you've been experimenting with AI, maybe not like in translation, but maybe supporting, let's say, preparing the reference materials or collecting information.
Yes, exactly. So it's really a tool that we need to make the most of it. Otherwise, we will be left behind if we don't use it. It's like when a machine translation also entered the market. Everyone was scared, but machine translation is something that you need right now.
It's like automation. It's a tool that helps a lot.
Automation, and actually will save you time from boring stuff, or stuff that you really need a lot of time, and then you can actually free some time and dedicate to other stuff that you never are able to find the time to do. So it's here. Let's make the most of it.
Yeah, because as I think the main theme throughout our conversation was the collaboration between different stakeholders is very important, and that takes a lot of, say, human work.
It takes a lot of time, and if you can automate the most manual and recurrent tasks in a different type of way, then you can actually dedicate to the most important projects that allows you to be present 100%.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's anything else. Otherwise, I think it's a good way to close on.
Yeah, I think we touched many topics.
It was a super interesting conversation. Yeah.
Really, thanks a lot for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. Yeah, it was thank you for joining us. Yeah. So, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us today. The Multilingual Content Podcast is powered by Undertow. We help companies translate their content into results. Get in touch if you want to know more. And if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episode. See you next time.